if you can't hear me or see me, if there are any issues with hearing me or seeing me. So, today we're going to talk about why transportation is way more important than you think it is in creating your economy. And this topic came about because I am busy with the economics world building part of the world building book that I'm working on, that I've been working on for a year. Uh, Heaven help me. I didn't think it would take this long to write. Hey, Lupex, good to see you. Um, so I was listening to the news, which currently the economics news is, right down exciting, as I'm sure um, most people who watch the occasional bulletins aware. And I don't know what was it about me, about the news that triggered this like rant in my head about like how everybody miss they 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 think that transportation is like this minute part of the economy, but transportation is the kind of the glue. Without transportation, freaking nothing works. And I mean nothing. You are stuck with literally just what you in your immediate region can reproduce and can utilize for like your raw inputs. So I'm going to have to explain a little bit just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I promise I'm not trying to put you all to sleep, but I do need to explain a little bit about supply chains. Okay, so don't go to sleep, just bear with me here. All right, so a supply chain is basically just the inputs that go into a product, right? And then how that product reaches its market. And its market can be anything, okay? A market can be a physical place, it can be a shop, it can be a flea market, it can be a digital marketplace, whatever. It's just where the thing gets sold to its consumer at a very rough high level. All right. So your supply chain involves like receiving goods as inputs as well as raw materials as inputs. Oh, and this is what triggered me. I saw somebody from the United States called Lutnick, which I think is like the Commerce Secretary or something like that. And he said Americans are going to screw little screws into iPhones. And I was sort of staring at the screen going, okay, but where are you going to get the little screws from? Because the little screws have to be transported as well. Like they don't just magically get manufactured either. They're an input. Anyway, so that was a whole different thing about like where steel furnaces are and so on. But it all comes back to transportation, right? Iron ore is most commonly found in like Sweden and Canada and so on. And the forges for it are, close to the mines because you don't want to transport ore very far. You would rather transport the refined metal, you'd rather transport steel. And so what happens is the steel is transported, right? And no amount of wishing or anything else will get those steel mines closer to where you want to use said steel, or will get those iron mines closer to where you want to use the steel. That was also, it was the case of like why the Bronze Age had so much transportation and such a vast trade network. The Bronze Age is called the Bronze Age because the material is made of brass and tin, brass and tin. Almost said aluminium, which would have been impressive in the Bronze Age, given that that is quite hard to make without industrial processes. So you can make bronze by mixing brass with arsenic, but that is incredibly dangerous, right? And results in heavy metal poisoning and arsenic poisoning and all kinds of fun elements like that. Which is why it might be why Hephaestus is depicted as he is, with like this crippled appearance, right? Because it might have been a Bronze Age smith that's working with arsenic. But anyway, so the Bronze Age had to maintain these massive transportation networks. So transportation is this absolutely critical part of your economy, just flat out, right? Without even looking at the fantasy. Yeah, copper and tin, but you can make it with arsenic. That's what I'm saying. Like, you can, but they very quickly switched to tin. And okay, so if you think just about our history, the big economic revolutions in our history, the ones that you can point at and go, this thing is the this thing is where the economy changed. They're all driven by changes in transportation, because transportation lets you bring more raw output together. It lets you bring more raw input together. The invention of the wheel revolutionized the movement of goods and people. The wheel is still one of our biggest inventions, right? The wheeled vehicle. Because without it, you're restricted to sleds and things like that. The wheel and the axle changed everything about our transportation. Replacing human muscles with animal muscles, domesticating beasts of burden, massively increased our trade network. If you think about the Silk Road, it spawned the whole economy between the West, between Western Europe and the East. In a way, the Silk Road spawned the golden age of Islam as well, because it allowed ideas to travel all along that massive land route, right? And when the Portuguese opened up the route around around Africa to the east, what happened is all those intervening towns, only a few of them survived. Most of them collapsed because of the change in transportation. Um, the, if you think about our very earliest civilizations, why were they on river routes? Because it's a means of transportation. It lets you use a barge. Why is Rome famous? The roads. The age of exploration opened up new shipping routes, opened up ways to bring more goods in. Railroads were the driving engine, railroads and the combustion engine were the driving engine of the industrialization age. Planes were the driving engine of our modern age. Like, transportation is everything. Okay, it's obviously not everything. Okay, now let's not go too far, but it's a lot. Okay, so transportation is a lot. And Lubeck says transportation also preserved knowledge that was lost temporarily. Yeah, so during the Middle Ages, so a lot of that knowledge in the Silk was kind of encoded in the Silk Route. During the travel in like in the golden age of Islam, it was in the Islamic education centers. A lot of the knowledge of the classical period ended up there, while Europe was having its issues. So in fantasy, and this is one of my bugbears in fantasy, nobody takes into consideration the impact that it has on your economy when you change your transportation. Okay? If you have telepathy or teleportation of any sort, your economy is going to look like a different animal. Okay? It is going to be absurdly different. And if I think of the Avatar: The Last Airbender. Okay. I don't understand how their economy is as basic as it is when they have what amounts to really rapid bender-driven transportation. As far as I can see, from what I can see in the show, there are a lot of benders. But the only people who are using bending is the Fire Nation, and they're using it in combustion engines. But you could bend water to make your craft run anywhere. And by doing that, you pretty much guarantee your supply chains. You even reduce the massive risk of your ships getting lost on the water. So why is the economic impact of bending not bigger? um, Hi, Katie. Good to see you. It's good to see a couple of my build it in just in timers on the stream as well. So yeah, my basic rant is because I feel like only in sci-fi do people consider the impact that this kind of instantaneous transportation has on the economy. Okay, so if you think about sci-fi aspects of this, they definitely explore it there. So the first one that I encountered is Anne McCaffrey's Talents and Talent and Tower series. I think that's what the series is called. Now, so this is a great series. It's kind of old-fashioned-ish writing, but it's really fun. And she takes you all the way from the development of these talents to where they're being used to transport in space, right? So at the beginning, people start kind of developing psi abilities, right? So this is telepathy and transportation, but it's not big enough that they can, just that they can make huge differences to the world's kind of movement of goods. They can move small packages, so they make some difference, but not like a massive change in the world trade networks. But then a guy called Peter Ridinger in her books, and she takes you through this whole experience with Peter Ridinger, figures out how to tap into the power generated by electricity, right? So how to utilize electric power. And that changes the whole game, because now all you have to do is hook him into a bigger generator and he can massively change the world, the World Trade Network. And that changes everything about their economy. Suddenly, their economy is entirely dependent on contracting these talents who can move goods instantaneously between 2 points. And then they figure out that they can move goods in space. And they basically become the linchpins of the 9-star league, where you've got these nine prime talents who are at different locations through the galaxy and who throw and catch cargo ships between planets. And that, to me, was a very realistic development. Like, that is what should happen in D&D worlds. Okay, if you can pay a mage to create teleportation gates between two cities, and that mage gets money eternally, why do you not have goods flowing between there? Why do you not have city specialization in different goods, trading goods across continents? Why are these economies stuck in the Middle Ages like they still have to be restricted to ox carts and ships? Why? um, so yeah, the Anne McCaffrey did it very well in the Tower and Talent series. And she explained why it wasn't the case in her Dragon series by the fact that the dragons had somehow lost status, and so they didn't transport things. um, Stargate also explored this very well in terms of like what happens in space, right? Especially since they didn't want to reveal to anybody in Stargate SG-1, they didn't want to reveal to anybody that they had this gate and that they had this means to trade. But then when you go to Atlantis, right, there they did use the gates to trade with for the addresses that they had. And you can see some of that in that they have this weird mix of technologies where they trade some things and they don't trade others. But the depression in the economy is explained by the Wraith, right? The Wraith keep the technology level low because otherwise the technology level would increase. Because here's the other thing about transportation: ideas don't breed in a vacuum. Ideas need ideas. When one idea meets another idea, they get together and they have little baby ideas, right? That's why, for example, the steam engine that Crane, I think it was Crane, in Egypt invented, the kind of little steam turbine, it went nowhere. It was just a curiosity. Why did it go nowhere? Because it had no friends. There was no rail tracks. There was no rail push carts to be pushed. There was no steamboats that could be driven by it, paddles that could be made to go, etc. It didn't have friends and it didn't have other ideas to meet with. It was just a brilliant idea all by itself, by its lonesome, and it died only to return 2,000 years later, 3,000 years. I can't remember exactly how long ago Crane was. Um, so if you have this kind of instantaneous, instantaneous travel, right? If your mages can fly, or they can teleport, or they can build gates, or they can do any of these things, ideas should spawn across your world. Ideas should be meeting other ideas and having little friends, and you should have massive technological progress. Why don't fantasy worlds have this? Well, because fantasy writers don't want to have massive technological progress, but but it is such a key part of how ideas developed in our world. It flummoxes me that we don't have more of this in worlds that have some kind of instantaneous um, transport. So Pablo says, how would a bigger fantasy economy be? Like more volume and variety of goods and services? Yes. So when I'm talking about a bigger economy, I mean more economic activity, more output, more productivity, and more specialization, right? So and technological economic advancements, as you know, as I say, ideas get together and they have other ideas. You could potentially have an industrial revolution much earlier, fueled by magic or whatever. And by industrial revolution, what I'm talking about is the automation of labor. Okay, I'm not per se talking about all the things we did as part of the industrial revolution, like railroads and steam engines and so on. I mean automation. Because once you start automating labor, you kind of loosen the bonds on your economic production. Because until that point, right, your economy is stuck by how many hours can be put into it. Now, even that can be reduced by transportation. If your transportation gives you access to a large labor pool that already, relieves some of the bonds. But automation's basically where it opens up. Like, if you think about a pair of jeans, if we had to spin the threads, just the threads, I'm not talking about weaving the cloth yet, just spinning the threads from cotton for a single pair of jeans would take a skilled spinner a year. Now, think about a human that you have to pay for a year. You have to keep them fed and clothed and in a house to produce one pair of clothing. And that's what automation does, right? Because it automates the spinning process, you get the thread much faster, and then a huge chunk of the cost leaves the item. Okay. So I would definitely expect to see a dramatic increase in productivity with this instantaneous transportation, even if it's just the bigger labor pool that you suddenly have access to, because you're no longer restricted to the labor pool of your city, right? You now have labor pools all over the world and specialized labor pools. So those people in that city over there, they are really good at spinning, and we buy all our threads from them. And they buy from us all our iron ore because we're really good at smelting it. So that, and then as people get together, as ideas meet each other, I expect to see massive improvements on an automation scale. I'm sorry if you thought I wasn't going to rant. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I studied economics as like an additional extra in my degree. I actually weirdly studied transport economics as well as economics as an extra on my degree. So I've got this like knowledge from back then. So Kaylee says, I'm absolutely flummoxed when it comes to the economy in my thing. They used to have a kind of magic that could easily transport goods, but that system is breaking. Okay, so if that system is breaking, there should be a whole bunch of people panicking and trying really freaking hard to fix it. Because if they had this system and if they worked the way normal, like people would normally do with a profit motive, they would absolutely have diversified their supply chains. All right. So you'd be dealing with diversified supply chains that where the inputs are spread across multiple specialized cities and multiple specialized labor pools close to multiple specialized raw resources. And so when the system breaks, this would cause the kind of interruptions we saw in our world when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. Okay, there will stop being products available for purchase, and that kind of thing creates panic. It creates panic in people. Okay? And panicked people cause a lot of pressure on their governments, and on the merchants and on everybody else. So 100%, the fact that that is breaking should be causing shortages of goods at various locations across your world and should be creating panic, especially in places where that supply chain feeds food. Okay, because it's one thing to not be able to buy plastic toys or even clothes. You can go for a while without clothes, but you start starving really fast. So if that transportation brings in food to a nation that does not grow enough food to feed its population, and we have nations like that in our world, they import more food than they grow locally, and they would starve if the supply chains failed. There would be a lot of pressure in those nations to fix that supply chain or to change internally so that they grew enough food to feed their populations. So I hope that helps, Kaylee. Iron Arm says, within my world, the wizard authorities have everyone scared of non-magical technology, some vague prophecy or the other, so they're stuck in place for 1,000 years and regress quite often. So I hear you, right? But people have, people have a way of working around those kinds of limitations. And also, even so, if they have transportation as like wizards, it would still make a massive difference to their supply chains because they'd still use their supply chains. Matthew asks, would automations have the same type of impact with economy and transportation? Yes. Yes. So, automation, as I said earlier, it's about labor, right? It's about freeing labor time. And that reduces the cost of goods. Tabby Wolf says, clockwork proto machines can automate labor. Absolutely. Clockwork's amazing. Safika says, I think one of the lesser considered issues in the use of magic in transportation is an unequal cost consequence. So, yes. Okay, so let's quickly talk about cost and consequence. So let's say that your magic system has a cost, okay? Absolutely, in that case, that cost has to be figured into the transportation, right? And that's something, as I say, Anne McCaffrey did with the electricity, right? So it cost in electricity generation to send a package, and therefore you have a built-in cost. If your magic system costs you, slitting people's throats and absorbing their blood, well, yes, then, the transportation is not going to be so good. It's not going to be that much fun. But D&D, for example, has zero cost to its magic. It has a limitation on its magic in that you can only cast so many slots per day. So you're limited in how much, and you can cost for that. But there is no downside to using your magic. It's just limited. So it becomes a resource like any other resource. So, yeah. Kaylee says a lot of the plot is devoted to panic people. Yep. So Tabby says, what if magic is dependent on a spellcaster's health condition? I think then there'd be a lot of people who would devote their time to making sure those mages are very healthy. It's like, let's say your magic was devoted on wizards getting nookie every night. I think there'd be a lot of people making sure that wizards got nookie. That's the nature of the game. So when you're creating your magic system, and this really does start with your magic system, right? Think about how it impacts your transportation and telecommunications, right? And I don't mean your phone, obviously. I mean, like, can people communicate across cities? Can they send goods across cities? Even if it's small packages, right? Think about how that will change the way that people approach economics. And I know that this stuff sounds really complicated when people are talking about supply chains and like the growth of global trade and blah, 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 blah. Don't get trapped in overcomplicating this. It is actually quite simple. And we've been doing this since the Bronze Age. It is not that hard. Basically, it's just about to create goods, you need the inputs into goods. That means you need raw materials and you need the input products. Things like cotton becomes thread, thread becomes cloth, cloth becomes jeans. Okay, that's a supply chain. cotton to thread to woven cloth to jeans. And the and the and that whole little daisy chain can be done within a city if it can grow cotton. But if you have transportation, it means you can grow the cotton where cotton grows well. You can make the threads where you have a large population of spinners. You can take the threads to a city where you have a large population of weavers. You can take the woven cloth to where you have automated sewing machines or whatever to churn it into the final product. And then you can take that final product and you can sell it everywhere where people want to buy jeans. And at each step, there's a transportation involved, right? You've got to take the cotton to the spinners, threads to the weavers, cloth to the sewers, and final product to market. And that's it. That's what a supply chain is. Right now, modern supply chains are complicated because there's a lot to it. Going back to what Lutnick said about the little screws, the problem with those little screws is they have their own little supply chain, right? Because you need steel for them, which means you need iron, which means you need the raw iron ore, which only occurs in certain places, all right? So once you've got the raw iron ore, you've got to put it in a furnace. That furnace creates steel. I don't know if you guys saw this on the news. The British government just recently took over iron furnace, a steel making furnace, because those furnaces can't be allowed to stop. If they stop, they're destroyed, right? And the company who was running it was going to stop it, and that would have stopped all steel manufacturing within Britain, which they didn't want to allow for national security reasons. And that is the kind of detail, that you don't have to think about it unless this is going to be important in your story. But things like a furnace needs to be close to the mine, and a furnace can't stop, yeah, especially an electrically generated one. Anyway, so once you've got the steel then needs to go into a mold to make that little itty bitty screw, right? And that is a whole supply chain by itself. And that screw then ends up in a factory, currently somewhere in China or India, where it gets screwed into the iPhone. Probably not by a human. I actually think those little screws are screwed in with a robot, but I mean, I could be wrong. So every product basically has its own little supply chain, and it's all of it's underlain with transportation. Now, as I said when I spoke about this in the beginning, it's not just about teleportation. It's also about fantasy animals, okay? If you think of the massive difference the oxen and the horse made in our civilizations, right? Because before we domesticated oxes and horses, what did we have? We had human power. So we could push a cart, but it was limited to human musculature. Once you've domesticated an animal, you can use the animal's strength or the animal's abilities to actually push your carts and do your transportation for you. If that animal is a flying creature, it makes a huge difference. That's why we domesticated the pigeon twice, because the pigeon can carry messages. Now, that's a pigeon. Imagine if you could domesticate something that could carry a package. Imagine if you could domesticate dragons. If you had dragons and you domesticated them, forget like conquering places. Yes, I'm sure you could conquer places, but do you know how much money you could make in the transportation business? It would be a total game changer. Your whole economy would look different. And if I have one bone to pick with George R. R. Martin. It's that he did not consider enough the difference dragons would make to the Valerian Empire. But he did set all of that way back in the past. So we don't know like how different it was when there were many dragons and there was a Valerian Empire. They might have had a thriving economy, and Westeros and Essos could be a regressed, a post-apocalyptic civilization in its way. But you know, so if you have such animals in your world that make such a big difference to transportation, it should also massively impact your economy, massively so. Katie says the spice must flow. In our history, the impact of the Silk Road, the ability, yeah. So the Silk Road was so critical to the flow of ideas between the East and the West. And all of that idea flow congregated in the Middle Eastern section, where they got the ideas from both sides. People make this mistake a lot with the Silk Road. They think somebody started, you know, in Venice, and then they traveled all the way across to Beijing. Or I think it ended in Beijing. Anyway, might have ended in Shanghai. It's been a while since I looked at it. But that's not actually what happened with the Silk Road. Okay. So what would happen is some merchant would have a route from Venice to Byzantium. Then from Byzantium to Samarkand, there'd be somebody else. Then from Samarkand to, you know, maybe down to India, there'd be somebody else. And from there back up to China, or from Samarkand to a place in China, there'd be somebody. And it was like these routes in between, right? But they would be travelers who would travel the whole route, or they would just be ideas. Letters would be carried from some dude in Venice with one merchant to Byzantium, from Byzantium onwards to Samarkand, maybe from Samarkand all the way through to China. And so those ideas all congregated in the middle, ideas from the East and ideas from the West, and became this like bubbling pot of science and this wellspring of ideas. And that was kind of what vanished when the route around around Africa's Horn, around Africa opened up. Yeah, a lot of those ideas led to the Industrial Revolution. There goes Buddhism traveling up the Silk Road. Yeah, there's a lot of things that traveled up the Silk Road. Matthew says, what types of animals of the sea and what types of creature? Absolutely. Okay, let's talk sea animals. So water transportation was such a critical part of our transportation, both in terms of the rivers and in terms of the ocean itself. Okay, so just on the rivers, obviously, we've had barges and canals and all of that going back into like our earliest civilizations. So do not be shy to use barges. Okay, I was watching a video 2 days ago about people who've done an archaeological dig in Malta and found that they were hunter-gatherers who sailed to Malta. Okay, so they had ocean-going vehicles as hunter-gatherers. So we've had boats going back for years. Now, the thing about ocean travel specifically, and river travel not so much, but ocean travel, is it is dangerous. Okay, and it's dangerous because of the weather and because of the animals and so on, but mostly the weather. Most of the animals don't bother you. If you can solve the weather problem, you open up so much sea travel, the weather problem and the navigation problem. All right. So weather can be solved with magic. Navigation can be solved with animals. If you think of a sea turtle, right, they know the beach they've been born at. They like pigeons, they have an instinct for it. All right. They return there to spawn. So if you can domesticate animals like that have a homing instinct for a route, that means you can't get lost. It solves the navigation problem with the ocean. So that's one of your first biggest problems to solve, is how do you navigate, all right, on the ocean blue. And then your weather problem you can solve with magic, or you could solve it with animals if you can figure out a way to keep people alive during a storm, because that's your biggest problem, right? With storms, is if a storm catches you wrong, your ship gets wrecked apart and you're done. So those are your two big problems that you need to solve. Trade, like solving the kind of like the push problem, the push and pull problem. So, trade winds and so on, not being at the mercy of the winds. Yes, that would be a nice problem to solve, but it's not that critical, because trade winds will mostly take you where you need to go. Or alternatively, you learn how to do sail manufacturing, right? So that you can sail with the wind, partially with the wind, and so on. Like, people can do a lot of that. But yeah, what you want to do is you want to solve the navigation problem with like homing pigeon equivalent animals, and you want to solve the weather problem. And then, I mean, whales would be nice if you could harness them, as like a pull the boat. Just bear in mind, like, I was watching Casual Geographic this morning. He did a video about Nemo, which I highly recommend. It was very funny. But he mentioned something which I was interested enough in that I went to go look it up. Blue whales, for example, only open their mouths when they're definitely going to get food, because they take in so much water that it takes them so much energy, right, that they don't even do it that often. So you have to think in terms of the scope of those kinds of animals. They will be very hard to domesticate without magic. So your kind of size, those size of animals, like your blue whale sized animals, kind of difficult to domesticate, just on that note. Carly says, whales with good. Right. I have the same image, but then I watched this blue whale, this thing about blue whales and like how much energy it takes them to open their mouths and so on. And I was like, okay, maybe not blue whales, maybe something a little smaller, like dolphins, orcas, something like that. Water magic would absolutely be helpful on the sea. Absolutely. Also druids with weather magic. Air magic, also very useful. All of that. If the culture itself is under the sea, then your domestication is more like a normal kind of domestication. You'd probably want like some kind of fish equivalent then. Maybe like rays or something like that would be good to domesticate, because they're quite fast swimmers. Or if you want mammals, dolphins and so on. The only problem is if you are an underwater culture and you domesticate an air breathe, like a lung mammalian culture like dolphins or turtles, they're going to want to go up to the surface to breathe. And that isn't necessarily what your culture is actually capable of doing, because you might not be capable of breathing the air up there. You might not even be capable of handling the pressure of having no water. So, it's like, I would think about that too. Like maybe you just want to have fish that have, gill breathing, depending on exactly what kind of species you have in your underwater civilization. Yeah, so basically today's live stream was just all about the fact that I think people need to think more about the impact that transportation has, because so often, like I was watching Avatar: The Last. Now I love Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I'm not going to throw too many rocks at them about their economy. They're not. It's not a show about the economy, right? Avatar: The Last Airbender is not. It's not about the economics. But I was watching like the episode where they have like sand sleds and sand benders and stuff like that. And I was just like, I don't I don't get it. I don't get why their economy is here. It doesn't make sense to me. Um, and I mean, that's not everybody. But if you're writing epic fantasy and you're introducing teleportation, like if I think about Wheel of Time, for example. Now, I don't know the Wheel of Time world that well. I honestly, I haven't read the books. I struggle. I get stuck in that Two Rivers village and I can't get past Matt. Matt is the one who annoys me. But if I think of the world of Wheel of Time, they have that wizard transportation. And I understand that it's just wizards who know how to use that transportation and so on. But it still has impact as far as I can see. It still has an impact on their civilization, and it still has an impact on their economy. And if you have the equivalent of that kind of transportation where you've got fixed points, right, that allow for transportation. Let's say, for example, I don't know, let's lean into a conspiracy theory. Let's say Stonehenge was some kind of teleportation network, right? And each one of those big stone menhirs could open like a portal to somewhere, right? Where there was a Gaulish menhir. Man, that would be some spectacular magic. But okay, what would happen? You would have cities grow right there where those teleportation points are. Right freaking there. Why? Because they can transport their goods easier. It is cheaper and faster to transport their goods using those teleportation points. You would absolutely have people starting businesses, buildings, factories, and so on that allow you to move those goods. And if you create those points, you must consider your economic supply chains and what people would do. I promise you, every single node point that can create a teleportation portal will have a city that spawns right on top of that point. It'll just naturally spawn there like it was a beast. Kaylee says, I did eventually come to the conclusion the basis for monetary wealth are the resources necessary for magic. Yeah, magic absolutely is a good call there. So Katie says, our bias of economy equals advancement not applying to an alien culture still requires the means of barter, the bills, wherever they might be. Yes. Trade and barter will absolutely expand if the goods are worth having. It doesn't matter whether it is a totally alien culture. None of that matters. If you can move your goods more easily, you will put your manufacturing point close to the point of transportation because it reduces your cost of movement, right? That is why people build their factories close to harbors. It's why they build them close to railway stations. It's why they build them anywhere. They build them close to the point of transportation because it reduces the cost. If you think of a harbor as a teleportation point, you would have factories right there on that teleportation point. Absolutely. um, Yeah, portal-related magic might be very taxing for the spellcaster. And then it would be a cost equation. And it would also be a cost equation that works like this, right? Let's say it's expensive to create a portal, but it doesn't matter whether the portal is big or small. It just matters that it's created and how long it's open. What'll happen? People will create portal capsules that take as much goods as they can stuff into that. The mage will open the portal and they'll hurtle the capsule through the portal and they'll close the portal down, right? That people will develop technologies that work with their transportation the same way we've done. Okay, our harbors, our ships, the Suez Canal. Why did that ship get stuck? Because it is built to the maximum specification that will fit through that canal. That's why it got stuck. Well, yes, that in the wind and blah blah blah, but it also got stuck because it fits into the canal. So when something happens that goes wrong, it turns sideways. And people will do the same with a magic portal. Kelly says it always boggled my mind that Stargate, when a Stargate was not inside a city. Yeah, like why? Just why? Now, the thing is, Stargate is a post-apocalyptic remnant, so we don't know when they were building the Stargates. They might have had completely different, points of view. Like, for example, when you look at Stargate Universe, they sent a ship to just seed Stargates so that they could visit new planets and galaxies and so on. So to some extent, I can get behind some of that, right? Because that was a post scarcity society on steroids, spreading their network. But once there is a Stargate in a place, like and there are other people using that Stargate, absolutely, there should be a city with manufacturing right there on that gate. Would I read a story where the protagonist is a portal mage trying to escape a minimum wage shipping job? Yes, I would. I I think that might be a really fun, cozy fantasy, like a bit of economic stakes there. But yeah, I think that would be a great story. Like, I enjoy stories grounded in economic plots. Um, you know, so Katie says she would read that story too. So you've got at least two. Safika says, aren't Stargate supposed to be the landing location for absolutely massive pyramid starships? So no. Okay. So it depends on where exactly you are in the lore. But Stargate SG-1, the Stargate is the Stargate network creates an instantaneous portal between two Stargates. And you've got this address that you can dial that sets your connection between the two Stargates. And it was created by I think they just call them the ancients, who were a race of a species of an intelligent species that ascended. I I I I don't know what that means exactly. They became energy beings, kind of thing. And they created this technology of stargates, and they used it to travel across the universe and the galaxy and whatever. So it was, to them, it was just like a network of a transportation network. But then they all ascended and became these like beings of light and energy and zenness and whatever. And they left these artifacts behind, which were then used by many other of the species of the galaxy, like the Gua'uld, who have those pyramid ships, and even Thor's people, the little gray aliens, I forget what they're called in the lore, and eventually us as well. so yeah. If you only know the movie, then yeah. The Stargate SG-1 massively expanded on it. If you enjoyed the movie, I highly recommend SG-1. It was hella fun. I loved SG-1. So yeah. Joan Jones says, hi, I'm new here. I think it's also important to consider route safety. Absolutely. So one of the reasons why the Silk Road was so dangerous was because there were so many barriers across it. So there was like the Gobi Desert, there were the mountains, there were rivers, etc., etc. One of the reasons why the route around Africa was so dangerous was because it was long. It involved a lot of hostile spots, and there's a lot of storms down there at that southern tip of Africa. So your you need a certain robustness to overcome the hazards of the route. And if you have like instantaneous and safe teleportation, well, aren't you just golden? Now you have a safe route. But I mean, if you also think of like Warhammer 40K and their travel in the warp is dangerous, right? And you have to factor that in to the impact that transportation has. You have to factor it into the price of goods, to how fast information travels, to how how much planets are willing to specialize, given that they have this dangerous void to cross between them. So yeah. Matthew says a portal spell would eliminate the problem of safety routes. Yes, you would just have your safety on the spot to consider. If you're actually physically traveling, like in an ox cart over a long distance, you need food, you need water, you need a lot of supplies. And then if something goes wrong and you lose that, you've got a whole kind of survival story on your hands. Ahmed says, what about levitation stones? An economy could be built off that and the supporting tech. Levitation stones would make such a big difference, because if you built your whole city on that, or let's forget it. Let's say levitation stones work like an ox cart, right? But it makes it light. So you can just load this levitation stone and push it. You no longer need a road, right? You no longer need that many beasts of burden. Maybe you can push it by hand, right? It makes such a big difference. Your vehicle makes it easier to transport as well. And that is worth thinking about very much, right? A levitation stone would give you a hovercraft in the Bronze Ages. You would eliminate the need for roads. You would eliminate carts breaking. You would eliminate the need for a string of camels walking across the desert with packs strapped to them. It is a massive, massive improvement in technology that would dramatically make trading easier. Not as easier as instantaneous teleportation, I'm not saying that, but it would make it a lot easier, and it would give you a hella leap forward in terms of your economic growth. So yeah, absolutely. You can build an entire economy of levitation stones and have it make a pretty big difference in your economic activity. Good point, Ahmed. Yeah, so that was my rant, guys, about supply chains and transportation routes, and why people underestimate the importance of this aspect of the economy that I really think world builders should pay more attention to. Safika says there's a trilogy of novels I enjoy with a semi-steam setting that has lighter than air metal called Ondium. Yeah, that would make a big difference if you had a metal that was lighter than air, could make stuff out of that. So I hope you enjoyed this live stream. If there are no other questions, I'm going to call it a night. I think I still have a warm sauna with my name on it. So it was a pleasure to spend a Saturday with you guys. There will be a podcast out next week. And yeah, I'll see you again soon. Have a very, very good weekend.